Redemption Road by Elma Shaw. Chapter 3. Bendo got out of the crowded yellow taxi at Broad and Mechlin Street and handed the driver the 10 Liberian dollar note. She was thankful that despite the worry caused by rebel incursions and UN-imposed sanctions on the country, the exchange rate was holding steady at 50 Liberian dollars to $1. She was also glad to be going back to work after taking time off for her grandmother's memorial service. But the smell of the raw sewage that had overflowed into the streets with a torrential August rain ruined the joy of the short hike up the hill. The scent was nothing though, Bendo had to admit, compared to the stench of the rotten bodies that littered this very intersection when she returned from behind the lines a few years ago. Broad Street was once more a lively bustling hub of informal sector activity, mingled with large banks, office buildings, government ministries, stationery stores, and now internet cafes. The large flamboyant trees, which grew in the center median, all the way from Snapper Hill to Crown Hill, were full of their pretty orange-red blossoms and provided canopies of shade and carpet of flowers and roots. Nothing could take away her love for Monrovia, the coastal capital where she was born and raised. But still, sometimes, Bendo couldn't help remembering the mess she had seen when she returned. The telephone wires and cables destroyed and hanging down into the street, the bullet-riddled buildings, the bodies of men, women, and children in various stages of decay. Broad Street was a frightful sight, and if someone had told her then that, someday, she'd be running a local non-governmental organization right in the center of where that chaos was, she would not have believed it. Bendo finally arrived at a freshly whitewashed building and made her way upstairs to the Peace and Practice office. The reception area of the NGO was decorated with poster-sized photographs of PEEP in action, helping disarmed child soldiers, showing off arts and crafts made in the vocational training classes, conducting HIV and AIDS awareness prevention program, and her favorite, walking with a banner held high during the 2001 Women's March for Peace. Bendo paused in front of the photographs, as she always did. It was a daily ritual that reminded her of a reason there though. Her reason for waking up each morning and putting her heart and soul into the work that she did. The sunny May day during the Peace March, when they stopped at the American embassy to read their resolutions, women started crying spontaneously, one by one. Young women, old women, the well-educated and the unlettered. But it was not the loud wailing of women in despair. It was not bitter, and it was not angry. It was quite as if they have the weight of their losses pressing down around their hearts and throats. The weeping spread like wildfire as they expressed the collective pain that had gathered in the depths of their souls. They wept for their lost babies, their lost futures, and their lost dignity. It was a haunting echo of past lament and a plea for the situation at hand. It had been 4 years since Taylor was elected, and new rebels had been fighting the government forces and terrorizing people of Lofa County and other places for the last 2 of those years now. Everyone feared that, without international action, the violence would soon reach Monrovia. No more, the woman begged that day. Please, stop this war. Bendo took a deep breath and glanced at the clock on the wall. It told her she was exactly 15 minutes before her 10 o'clock appointment. Agnes Jalla, PEEP's co-director, was already at work arranging chairs for a group counseling session. She was Bendo's age, but had not had much formal education beyond high school. Bendo had selected her as a partner though, because of Agnes's passion, and for the way she could reach the client PEEP was designed to help. Agnes was reluctant to be given the title and responsibility of co-director, but Bendo had insisted. The women greeted each other warmly, and Agnes smiled, showing the wide gap between her 2 front teeth. Calvin came to see you this morning, she said. What did he want? I don't know, but if it had something to do with the center, he would have talked to me. Not so? Maybe he's looking for you, Bendo. Agnes smiled and winked. Bendu laughed. Her friend Calvin had visited her at the center once or twice and had co-sponsored one of their events. Agnes had been trying to play matchmaker ever since she met him. It was a hopeless effort though, and Calvin seemed to have no time to listen to Agnes's hints and pleas. Calvin's considering giving us some real money, Bendu said as she headed to her office. But if he's looking for something else first, he would better go find it in a different place. Agnes followed her and stood at the door, while Bendu poured herself some hot water from the flask. Bendu looked around at her and shook her head. You don't give up, do you? Give him a chance, Agnes urged. He's a very nice man, and fine too. What are you so scared of? Bendu didn't answer. She agreed. Calvin was nice and handsome, but there was so much more to consider. Look, you girl, Agnes said gently, you can't let your past rule your future. Bendu sat down at her desk with a cup of tea. Wait, isn't that what we are supposed to do? Learn from the past? Agnes sighed. Of course, but remember, you didn't make a mistake. What happened to Jonah was the will of God. When the food in your pot is finished, you will never eat again? Bendu laughed despite herself, and Agnes grinned. Think about it, she said with a wink, and with that, she let Bendu alone and went back to her own office. Bendu sighed and sipped her tea. Ah, the Jonah past. Is that what I'm doing? Letting an unfortunate incident of fate scare me away from love? Bendu put the cup down and rubbed her temples. What happened to Jonah was more than unfortunate. Losing her first love had been like dying herself. All life, all heart and soul and joy ripped out of her body and thrown into the depths of the Atlantic. Jonah had been nothing like his biblical namesake who tried to avoid his duty to God's people and ended up in the belly of a whale. Instead of just spewing forth rhetoric among friends, like so many pseudo activists, he often gave rousing public lectures and led demonstrations to bring awareness to injustices that permeated both rural and urban Liberian society. Bendu was awakened and motivated by his passion and his fearlessness. He was exactly what she wanted, and she knew it the day she met him. Granny May and old man Sam Lewis embraced and loved Jonah as a son. Not everyone approved of their relationship though. When they announced their engagement, her mother kept insisting she was too young. Bendu's father accepted her choice without a fuss, but also without the same enthusiasm he had shown for the politician's son-in-law, Terence Clark. Some people thought it happened too fast, and many others wondered slightly, and a few aloud, why she didn't find a nice boy whose ancestors had come over to Liberia on a ship. Bendu and Jonah never had a chance to show the world what they could make it. He died of an unknown cause just 2 months before the wedding. Bendu picked up the framed photograph of them at their engagement party and looked at it wistfully. Their bodies were facing each other and they were holding hands. They had been looking into each other's eyes, but just before the photographer snapped the photo, Jonah had turned and smiled into the camera. As she always did, Bendu looked for some sort of sign that the end was near for him. Was there something in his eyes? In his smile? In his posture? No, there was nothing out of the ordinary. No telling aura picked up by the camera's sometimes magical lens. What she thought she could see was a soul brimming over with love for her. That was all. She put the photo back on the desk next to the crystal Madonna and child paperweight that always prompted people to ask her if she was Catholic. Her thought drifted to Calvin. He had been her brother's best friend and was a witness to his murder in 1980. Calvin had never quite gotten over Benji's death. In fact, he had never quite gotten over the whole crew. What would they be like together? She and Calvin with their issues? Bendu shook her head as if to clear it and began putting together a packet of brochures, newspaper clippings, and press releases into Pip's work. At precisely 10 a.m., there was a knock on her door. Come in, she called cheerfully. When the door opened, her eyes widened in surprise to see Calvin standing there. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and dark eyes that twinkled when he smiled at her. Oh, Bendu said. I was expecting someone else. Calvin contorted his face into a pained expression. Calvin, really? She laughed. I have an interview right now. Can we talk later? No, ma'am, he said as he approached her desk. He leaned over and kissed her on both cheeks. He grinned and handed her a business card. Calvin J. Daniels, Wall Journal. I called, but your landline wasn't working, so I came by earlier this morning to tell you in person. Bendu looked at the card. You are the writer who's going to interview me? She looked up and smiled at him. Congratulations. Since when? Last Friday. I got a freelance contract with World Journal. I'll be covering the Mono River Union for them. Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. Mostly political stories. And the occasional little NGO. I practically begged for this assignment, Calvin said, glancing at her as he sat down to set up his tape recorder. Not all my subjects are going to be beautiful as you are. Bendu smiled. What about conflict of interest? Oh, there's no conflict here. Believe me, I'm just interested. Very interested. Bendu lowered her eyes, suddenly shy, and felt a warmth rush to her cheeks. You know that's not what I meant, she said with a smile. I'm talking about the fact that you're my friend and a donor to this center. One of our favorites, in fact. Calvin smiled and raised his eyebrows. Is that right? Yes, but don't let that go to your head. Bendu replied. Seriously, though, how can you write a fair and balanced story? I know you people do good work, but don't worry. If I ever find something dirty, I won't hesitate to report it. Bendu laughed again. She could see why Agnes was charmed. She was also glad that the center was featured in such a reputable magazine. Some of the local newspapers were so full of errors that their stories were virtually useless. Calvin was one of the best writers around, and World Journal was definitely top of the line. In fact, this article could prove to be a crucial step in the survival of the center. They were running out of their initial funding. An excellent press could help encourage more individuals and organizations to support their work. The two friends talked at length. As the interview began to wind down, Kelvin asked about the difficulties of the program. Bendu stopped to think for a moment. One obstacle we face with every group, at least in the beginning, is a wall of silence, she answered. It's difficult getting some women to open up and talk about what happened to them. It's just not in the African culture to bare our souls in public. So, when someone is too deeply hurt, we don't push too hard. We just let her benefit from the stories of those who are able to share. And that's enough? It works? Calvin asked. Sure, it doesn't always take full disclosure to be able to move on. Sometimes, the quiet ones have the greatest influence in their communities when it comes to reconciliation and peace building. Then why make anyone disclose anything at all? Bendu shrugged. It's easier, I guess, when they can let the pain surface and let people challenge them to deal with it quickly and completely. Calvin paused and leaned forward slightly. And what's your story, Bendu? He asked softly. What? Your story. You have never told me. You have been talking about what happened to everyone else, but you lived here during the war too. Bendu shifted in his seat and began to arrange the papers on the desk. Well, yes, but this interview is not about me. Okay, maybe you can tell me this, Calvin said. For the story, how did you become involved in this work, and how has it changed you? Oh, I just wanted to help war-affected women. That's all. Bendu handed him the press package she had prepared. For background information, she said. Thanks, but you didn't answer me. How has working with this woman changed you? Bendu's stomach tightened with a familiar feeling of sickness and anxiety as she struggled mentally to remove herself from among the women he was talking about. She looked up and saw Kevin looking at her, waiting. They have changed me in so many ways, she said. repeated the spiel she gave whenever she talked privately to the center's visitors. They're strong, resilient, unwavering in their faith. No matter what happened to them, I learn from them every day. Calvin did not look impressed or surprised. He cocked his head as if to say, "Come on, I'm waiting for more." Bendu stood up. "Hey, we've been talking for quite a while, and I need to." "You're right," Calvin interrupted as he turned off the tape recorder. "I've actually run into my next appointment. It's been good talking to you." He stood up and looked a bit surprised when she reached out to shake his hand. "Goodbye, Calvin. I look forward to reading your article." Calvin held her hand a little longer than necessary. "May I come by if I need anything else?" "You'll be able to call," Benji replied, relaxing again as she walked him to the door. "We're giving up on landlines and getting hooked up on Lone Star tomorrow. I'll call you with a number. We'll have a cell phone for Agnes too." "Good. And may I call you for a date?" He smiled. "Conflict of interest?" "Big time," she replied as she gave him a playful push out the door. Bendu leaned against a closed door and sighed. She decided she would go catch the end of the group counseling session because she knew if she sat at her desk alone, she would start thinking about her story, about the things Calvin wanted to dredge up. But those things were at the bottom of her soul, and that's where she wanted them to stay for now.